A spy network kidnapped me and murdered nearly everyone I care about, which really pissed me off. Now, I don't know who's a threat or who isn't.
You missed one.
Not you.
Sad to see you getting sloppy in your old age, Bernard.
You're an idiot.
There are stories that begin with the question so simple it feels almost harmless, and yet the deeper you follow it, the more unsettling it becomes. And Citadel Season 2 builds itself entirely around one of those questions. What happens when the people trained to remember everything are forced to forget who they are? In a world defined by secrets, identities, and silent wars fought in the shadows, memory is not just a tool, it is power, control, and survival. And when that memory is stripped away, what remains is not peace, but vulnerability. That lingering vulnerability becomes the emotional and narrative core as the story continues beyond the explosive foundation laid before, pushing its characters into a reality where the past is not simply lost, but actively hunting them. Years before the present timeline unfolds, Mason Kane and Nadia Sinh were not just elite operatives, they were among the most trusted agents of a global intelligence network that existed beyond governments and borders, an organization built on balance, secrecy, and the belief that power should never belong to a single entity. Citadel itself was designed as a counterweight, a silent guardian, ensuring that no shadow organization could dominate the world unchecked. But something went catastrophically wrong. The system collapsed from within, enemies rose from the cracks, and the agents who once defined its strength became scattered fragments of a broken legacy. Their memories were erased, their identities dissolved, and they were left to rebuild lives that were never truly their own. Season 2 leans into the consequences of that erasure with a sharper, more introspective lens. The story is no longer just about rediscovering who they were, but confronting whether those past selves are worth reclaiming at all. Mason Kane, once a man of precision and instinct, now finds himself caught between two conflicting truths: the ordinary life he has built and the extraordinary one that refuses to stay buried. There is a quiet tension in his existence, a sense that every decision he makes is being influenced by something he cannot see or fully understand. That tension becomes even more pronounced as fragments of his past begin to resurface, not as clear memories, but as flashes, instinctive reactions, and emotional echoes that refuse to fade. Nadia Sinh, on the other hand, carries a different kind of weight. Where Mason struggles with confusion, Nadia is defined by a deeper sense of dissonance, as though her body remembers what her mind cannot. Her journey in this continuation is less about rediscovery and more about reconciliation. She is forced to confront the idea that the person she once was may not align with the person she has become, and that reclaiming her past could mean losing the fragile sense of identity she has managed to build. This internal conflict adds a layer of emotional complexity that transforms the narrative from a standard espionage thriller into something far more intimate, where the real stakes are not just global but deeply personal. As the story unfolds, the presence of Bernard Orlick becomes increasingly significant. He is not just a spy master or a guide, he represents the last thread connecting the past to the present. His knowledge is both a weapon and a burden, as he carries the truth of what happened when Citadel fell and understands the magnitude of what is at risk if its enemies succeed. There is a quiet urgency in his actions, a sense that time is running out, and that the pieces he is trying to bring together may not fit as neatly as they once did. His relationship with Mason and Nadia evolves in subtle but important ways, shifting from one of authority to something closer to partnership as the lines between mentor, ally, and manipulator begin to blur. The antagonistic forces that emerge in this continuation are not simply villains in the traditional sense, but embodiments of the chaos that fills the vacuum left by Citadel's collapse. These are organizations and individuals who have been waiting for the balance of power to shift, who see opportunity in the absence of oversight, and who are willing to exploit every weakness that Mason and Nadia carry. What makes them particularly dangerous is not just their resources or reach, but their understanding of the very system they are trying to dismantle. They know how Citadel operated, they understand their agents, and they are prepared to use that knowledge in ways that are both strategic and deeply personal. The world itself feels more expansive and interconnected, with the narrative moving fluidly across different locations, each one adding texture and depth to the story. From densely packed urban landscapes filled with surveillance and hidden agendas to isolated environments where silence becomes its own kind of threat, every location carries a sense of history, a suggestion that the events taking place are part of something much larger, something that has been building long before Mason and Nadia began to remember who they were. What makes this continuation particularly compelling is its ability to balance action with introspection. The high-stakes sequences are as intense and meticulously crafted as ever, filled with tension, precision, and the kind of unpredictability that defines the best espionage storytelling. But beneath that surface lies a quieter narrative, one that explores identity, trust, and the fragile nature of memory. The action is not just spectacle, it is an extension of the characters' internal struggles, a physical manifestation of the conflicts they are trying to resolve within themselves.
The relationship between Mason and Nadia remains at the heart of the story, but it is no longer defined by familiarity or certainty. Instead, it is shaped by rediscovery, hesitation, and the slow rebuilding of trust. There is an emotional distance between them that cannot be easily bridged, a recognition that the people they once were may not be the people they are now. And yet, there is also an undeniable connection, something that persists despite the absence of memory, suggesting that some bonds are not dependent on recollection, but are instead rooted in something deeper and more instinctive. As more truths begin to surface, the narrative introduces new layers of intrigue, revealing that the fall of Citadel was not a singular event, but part of a much larger conspiracy. The idea that everything was planned, that the memory wipe was not just a desperate measure, but a calculated move, adds a new dimension to the story. It forces the characters and the audience to question everything they thought they understood about the past. Who can be trusted? What was real and what was manipulation? And perhaps most importantly, what happens when the truth is more dangerous than the lies that replaced it? The pacing of the story reflects this growing complexity, gradually shifting from a sense of uncertainty to one of urgency. Early moments are defined by exploration and discovery, as Mason and Nadia piece together fragments of their identities. But as the narrative progresses, the stakes escalate, the threats become more immediate, and the need for decisive action becomes unavoidable. This transition is handled with careful precision, ensuring that the tension builds naturally without losing the emotional grounding that makes the story resonate. Technology and surveillance continue to play a significant role, reinforcing the idea that in this world, privacy is an illusion and information is the most valuable currency. The tools used by both allies and enemies are advanced, but they are never portrayed as infallible. Instead, they serve as reminders of the constant battle between control and unpredictability, where even the most sophisticated systems can be undermined by human error, emotion, or intent. One of the most intriguing aspects of this continuation is its exploration of legacy. Citadel is no longer just an organization, it is an idea, a symbol of what once was and what could be again. The question is not simply whether it can be rebuilt, but whether it should be. The characters are forced to confront the implications of restoring something that may have been flawed from the beginning, and whether the world truly needs another shadow organization operating beyond accountability. As the narrative moves toward its more intense moments, the lines between past and present begin to blur even further. Memories return in unexpected ways, sometimes offering clarity, sometimes creating more confusion. The process is not clean or linear. It is messy, fragmented, and often painful. But it is also necessary, as each recovered piece brings Mason and Nadia closer to understanding not just who they were, but who they need to become in order to face what lies ahead. The emotional weight of these revelations is balanced by moments of quiet reflection, where the characters are given space to process what they have learned. These moments are crucial, providing depth and allowing the audience to connect with the characters on a more personal level. They remind us that beneath the espionage, the action, and the global stakes, this is ultimately a story about people, flawed, complex, and searching for meaning in a world that constantly shifts beneath their feet. As everything converges, the story builds toward a climax that is both intense and thought-provoking, challenging the characters to make choices that will define not just their own futures, but the future of the world they inhabit. The resolution does not offer easy answers, nor does it attempt to tie everything into a neat conclusion. Instead, it leaves room for interpretation, for continuation, and for the possibility that the story is far from over. In the end, what makes this chapter of the story resonate is not just its scale or ambition, but its willingness to explore the human side of a genre often defined by spectacle. It understands that the most compelling conflicts are not always external, but internal, and that the journey of rediscovering oneself can be just as dangerous as any mission. The question that lingers is not just whether Mason Kane and Nadia Sinh can save the future, but whether they can come to terms with the past that defines them, and whether that past is something worth holding on to or something that should finally be left behind.